To the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, and thank our friends over at Deepwater Wind for their sponsorship. It has already been a busy day today. We had Leland King Trio on amazing jazz artists on the Alex Anani Lounge this afternoon at 2, and then Molly O'Brien had a bang-up hour at the 3 o'clock. But now it is cha-ching, it is Bitcoin, every kind of currency you can have wrapped up together. Cryptocurrency, old school currency, crumpled up pieces of $1 bills. It is all here with the money man, Gary Sasse. Gary, welcome. As always. We missed you last week. You weren't here, and we ended up in a trade war.
Well, that's because I was scared. Next time I'll be here, and so the trade war won't happen.
Let's talk about trade wars. Do trade wars matter to Rhode Island?
They matter big time to Rhode Island.
Why do they matter to Rhode Island? You see all the national news about the pig farmer in Iowa. There's not a lot of attention to to exporting here in Rhode Island.
Well, let me give you some numbers, and maybe you'll change your mind.
Okay.
Rhode Island exports about $2.4 billion a year. 1/5 of our labor force, about 132,000 jobs, are related to importing or exporting. We export everything from manufactured goods to scrap metal to non-ferrous metals. And if you go back and look at the growth of the export-import business in Rhode Island, since 2003, that's grown 3 times the state gross product. So it's very, very important. The other reason it's important is less specific than the numbers I mentioned. The numbers themselves should be a wake-up call. Rhode Island is part of a regional economy, and it does affect the regional economy. It affects national economy, which we're part of. So if the country sneezes, we catch cold. So that's part of it as well. But the numbers are real. 2.4 billion in exports, 1/5 of our labor force.
But the things the president has talked about. Let's go to China's reaction. China swung back. Do any of those swingbacks have much to do with Rhode Island, though?
Well, no one really knows, because the president's way of setting policy is to bluster, and then after
it's actually to tweet and bluster.
Tweet and bluster.
Yeah, you have to use the technical terms.
So after he tweets and blusters, he claims that's going to position him to negotiate more effectively. That may be true in developing a real estate tower in downtown Manhattan. I'm not quite sure how it works when you're dealing with sovereign nations.
Isn't he right, though, on the issue of China's illegally taking U.S. IP over and over and over again for decades, ripping off, violating copyrights, violating patents? I can name you 5 companies in Rhode Island that spend more time and energy fighting against businesses in China, just literally stealing them blind.
No question. China's trade practices have resulted in American firms being blackmailed into transferring technology, intellectual property, if they want to have access to the Chinese markets. And that's a real problem. And so you can give the president and the administration credit for drawing attention to that problem.
Yeah.
You also probably can give them some credit for being more bold in how they've done it, because the past presidents of both parties have thought they've had deals with the Chinese, but they weren't worth the paper that they were written on. And so, yes, he is doing a service to the country and to business in the country by pointing out the trade practices of China, putting us at a disadvantage, the dumping of product in this country. All those are legitimate concerns. Question, though, is how do you effectively end those concerns? And the jury is still out. So
well, we've tried diplomacy. I mean, literally for 30 years, this same narrative has gone on, and there's been little retrenchment by the Chinese. And in reality, maybe this is the first time. And listen, as we've seen in his trade strategy, oftentimes in his trade strategy, he makes a big, bold statement, maybe flawed, but then when actually executed, it achieves some of the things that he's trying to achieve and doesn't have the adverse impact. And by the way, the market's back up today.
Yeah, the market's going to fluctuate, but I would feel more comfortable if the word strategy meant anything to this administration. You use the word strategy very cavalierly.
They got past your tax reform, which hadn't been done since
We'll-
1986.
We'll talk about the impact of this tariff policy on tax reform in a minute. But you know, if you felt comfortable, and I have no inside knowledge, but my perception and people I speak with.
You have close to inside knowledge.
Well, I don't have a.
You have friends who have inside
I don't
knowledge.
have a great deal of comfort that a lot of people in the administration knew about the announcement before the announcement was made. And if we had a strategy
Yeah.
to level the playing field with China, to end their trade practices that are really nothing more, as I said, blackmail, transferring technology and intellectual property, and this was part of the grand strategy, then you have to give it time to play out. And I think we have to give it time to play out regardless. And that's the question of confidence you have in the leadership. I don't know what the strategy is. I don't know what the backup positions are, and I don't think they do.
Right. So you're saying danger, danger, danger?
I'm saying that we've hit the right nerve.
Yeah.
That for too long, as you pointed out, China has not been an honorable trading partner, that American presidents have.
And by the way, they've sat down, signed pieces of paper that literally 5 seconds after they're signed, they're in violation.
They have no intent
Right.
to follow through. And so, you certainly can't be critical of the president pointing this out and the president trying. And his point is that we've tried to jawbone before, jawbones hadn't worked, so I have to do something more than jawboning. Okay, then question, what are the consequences of more? How do the consequences of more affect certain segments of the American economy? How do they affect the farm economy? How do
Sure.
they affect the agricultural exports?
Listen, we've put all our farms almost out of business here in Rhode Island, or most of them.
But we still eat. And I heard somewhere, I don't follow this very closely, that food services was going to be one of our target industries. I think there's some kind of, maybe it's only indirect, but there's some kind of relationship between food and food services, and food comes from the farm. There's nothing much we can do, or laboratories in some cases, but there's nothing much we can do about that. So the concern is, okay, if you say something on day one, what do you do on day two? And that's maybe nothing more than stylistic. We may be underestimating the president. There are a lot of things that can be happening, but as I sit back and look at it, I don't see a targeted, focused strategy that we're going to get even with the Chinese. And when the Chinese respond, with their tariffs, I'm not sure what the political will is, and whether this president has the courage to stand in the box, when the fastballs are coming at your head. So we'll see. I think it's being executed very poorly. That's the point. Other point too, which shows inconsistency in thinking in the administration. My memory is that the value of the tax cuts that came from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was probably about $150 billion just this year. Well, if you put a 25% tariff on $150 million worth of imports, let's assume they're Chinese imports, then the cost to Americans and American businesses goes up by $38 million. So we're taking about 20 cents of the tax.
$1 billion.
Billion dollars.
Yeah.
So we're taking about 20%, 20 to 25%.
And giving it away.
Of the tax cut and minimizing the stimulative impact the tax cut might have on the economy. So it's okay to chew gum and walk at the same time, but you got to know where you're going, and that's the concern.
Let's jump to the state of Rhode Island. Kate Nagel, our news editor, had the speaker on the other day. And let's go Paw Sox first. He said that he's in, I think it was secret negotiations with the Paw Sox ownership group. I think it was in an undisclosed location. Lots of secret things going on.
It's only people's business, don't.
Listen, we've offered a number of times to broadcast it live. No one seems to take us up on it.
Woodrow Wilson, open covenants, openly arrived at.
That's right. So here we are. It's I think the Paw Sox have threatened now, since Jim Skeffington's ownership group took it over in 15. I think it was in late 15. They've threatened to move out of the state of Rhode Island more than 4 million times. I believe it's now up to 4 million times. We're now in April of 18, we have no viable deal in place. What are we doing here?
Well, as you know, you and I have discussed this on a number of times. I don't have a feeling one way or the other about.
Okay, after 3 years, you should have a strong feeling.
Well, if I do, I'm not going to share with anybody. About this project. So I'm just really somebody that's.
We're trying to nail you down on this.
Well,
You can't be the money man and not weigh in
I have
on
to get the
the
facts.
powerful interests of the
I-
Pawtucket Red
I
Sox.
got a lot more things that are interesting than worry about a minor league baseball park. But the three most feared words in Rhode Island should be when the legislature says we're still talking.
Yes, right. That's right.
Because they're not talking to beat lobbyists out of a free meal at Capitol Grill. They're talking for other reasons. And I have been of the opinion, looked foolish for a while there, that something was going to be decided upon. And the speaker said it was dead a few months ago. I felt that there were still conversations going on, and as long as there are conversations going on at the State House, there's a reason for those conversations. So I think the speaker was being pretty candid with Kate, by saying that we're dealing with this thing, we're trying to work something out. They're not speaking because they don't want to work something out.
Right.
So that's the principal point.
Well, listen, from an editorial standpoint, we've taken as a publication, we've taken the standpoint of, listen, hey, if it's land and infrastructure, that's a good deal. That's kind of been the Massachusetts structure for the past 10, 15 years. It's kind of what happened at Gillette, TD, et cetera, which is you privately pay for the construction of the arena, the stadium, will help you with the land acquisition and the roads and infrastructure. Seems to be a fair deal. It's a much better deal than what's going on around the country. This idea of tying Pawtucket in the middle of this thing seems like a fool's errand. That's a city that's on very, very thin financial footings. Lots of issues tied to a massive exodus. They've lost a number of their Memorial Hospital. Looks to be like Hasbro's going to relocate and consolidate their interests here in Rhode Island. Can't we do better? Can't we just get back to basics? Why is Massachusetts able to put forth a cohesive strategy, and we've got to come up with the most convoluted financing structures in the history of the world?
Well, that's a simple question without a simple answer. There's been something called MIT and Harvard in Massachusetts for 200 years, so it didn't just happen yesterday. A second thing is the quality of leadership.
Yeah.
Particularly in the governor's office, whether it's Charlie Baker, or whether it was Weld, or other governors there. Education is a great example. In 1991-92, Billy Bulger and then governor made a deal that they were going to reform their schools, and they held people's feet to the fire for 20 years. There were some modifications, some tweaks, but essentially they held people's feet to the fire, and that leadership changed the education system. Massachusetts now is considered, if not the top, one of the 5 top state education systems in the country, though they have their Lawrences and their Lowells, and they have problems as well. You look at what happens in Rhode Island. I chaired a commission for Governor Sutherland called the 21st Century Education Commission. We came up with the identical plan that Massachusetts came up with. Everyone says they were going to implement the plan. It's been implemented 27 times now. And so, if you change your socks every hour, you don't get a chance to sweat. And that's the point. So there's leadership, there's built-in infrastructure advantages. Boston happens to be in Massachusetts. They don't call it the hub city for no reason. So their infrastructure advantages, their educational advantages, their leadership advantages, and the nasty thing that we don't like to talk about, there is a size advantage. Massachusetts is not a big state, but we are a small state.
Yeah. Let's go to the state budget. We're now in April again. We're not far away from the end of the fiscal year. We're still dependent on a number of questionable elements of the proposed state budget. One of the biggest holes, obviously, is $20+ million coming from sports gambling, which everyone is awaiting the decision of the United States Supreme Court, and that will come out in May. If that does not go our way, or does not go the way that the administration has proposed that it will, that sports gambling will be legalized for states to then take on. There's an additional 20-something million dollars. We're now looking at about $220 million deficit. Where are we, and when do we hit the worry button?
We hit the worry button 3 months ago.
Did we do it?
This governor didn't do it in the budget. This is a gimmick-filled, budget. Your question is what happens to the budget if the economy goes, south?
Well, I didn't even get to that. I'm just talking I think the South question is a much bigger issue. We're in really strong economic period nationally.
And yet you would describe this budget, if you were being
As
generous,
somewhat-
is finely balanced with little room for error and little room for unanticipated.
We're only a few inches, a few tens of millions away from being catastrophic is too much of a word, but it's we've used a lot of one-timers. We're down to the bottom of the list on one-timers. We took the early buyouts with state employees. Listen, you contrived half of these one-timers.
There was always a rabbit coming out of the hat.
The bottom of the hat. We are now at the bottom of the hat.
That's what they always told me. And then we had the tobacco settlement.
Okay, do you have that one in your back of your pocket?
Well, that's been used. You can't use them twice. So I'm not being up there anymore. I can't tell you what's in the bottom of the hat. But in seriousness, as you look at revenue collections through February, through most 8 months of the fiscal year,
Yep.
7 months of the fiscal year, they're running ahead.
Yep.
They're running ahead by about $30 million. Well, that's $30 million this year. It's $30 million built into the base. So it's not an inconsequential amount of money. That's on
But we're 60 on the whole this year, and we're 220 estimated on next year.
227 and 23.
Yeah.
And that's a significant number because that's about 5% of the budget, over
Yeah.
6% of the budget. But on the positives, it's a fluid situation. Was my point.
Yeah.
Revenues, running ahead. That wasn't anticipated. But the bottom line is this, and this is the truth that nobody, will confront. We use a significant number of gimmicks to balance this budget. You mentioned, gambling. It's not only the $23 million that you're betting on Neil Gorsuch in the Supreme Court. It's the fact that sports betting money is very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
People bet more when their teams are doing well.
Yeah.
They bet less when their teams are doing poorly. It fluctuates very much by season. So to pin your hat on that one, you really have to know how to handicap Las Vegas.
So Belichick playing Malcolm Butler could be worth $5 million to the state coffers.
That's definitely. So it's a very, fluid kind of money. But think of it this way. The gimmicks: $26 million in scoops, taking money that was supposed to have been transferred to DOT for infrastructure, keeping it in the general fund, about another $10 million. You read all kind of stories now about affordable housing issues and how that's affecting economic development. We scoop money from Rhode Island housing. It was a kind of a dog chasing a dog in heat, just looking for money and scooping here and there without understanding what the interconnections and what the policies were. Very weak economic assumptions used in the out-year budgets. You mentioned before, by 2023, if nothing changes, we'll have a deficit. Don't worry about the numbers. It's almost equal 6% of budget. So what happens, as the economy turns, the cycle turns, as we don't realize our expectations? Well, on one hand, we did build low expectations for the out-year budget, so I think that needs to be netted out of that. But you get to the point, and this is where you are. You're in a kind of permanent fiscal purgatory. You can't go to heaven and you can't go to hell. You borrow from Peter to pay Paul. You look for one-time gimmicks. You don't make the tough decisions. Sometimes you don't invest in an area that you'd like to invest in. Sometimes you may have to tweak a tax. There's plenty of taxes that are tweaked in this budget. People don't talk about those, tax increases on cigarettes, on a certain kind of sales tax base being broadened. So this purgatory. It's not a catastrophe. but you can't do what you need to do.
Study came out today. Rhode Islanders have the 7th highest tax burden in the country.
Who said that?
It was a Wallet Hub.
Well, I think see, these tax rankings drive me nuts because you really have to see what they mean. And we made a tremendous amount of progress in this state in making our income taxes, both our corporate and our individual tax, more competitive. Keep in mind the top marginal income tax rate in Rhode Island right now is 5.99%.
Yeah.
You know, we do better in Carolina, better in North Carolina. Our corporate tax rate is one of the lowest in New England. So that ranking doesn't mean anything when you look at what we've done on the corporate, on income taxes. On sales taxes, we have one of the highest rates, 7%.
Do we have the highest in the country?
I don't, well, if you had local on top of it, no.
Yeah.
A state, we probably tied for several states for the
Yeah.
highest rate. But you look at the amount of sales, what we pay sales taxes on, and you look at sales taxes paid per capita, and we're pretty low. We're you know, in the bottom half of the country. So sales tax and income taxes per se aren't a problem. The problem is one thing, and there's one thing that drives our very high ranking, and that is the property tax.
Yeah.
And it's primarily to support public education. And you really, and gets to the point you raised earlier. Okay, how do we fix our tax situation up? How do we reduce the property tax burden and move our tax burden more into the middle of the pack,
Sure.
and the top of the pack? Well, you can't, if you're always fighting at the margins, always fighting potential deficits, you can't fund public education
Right.
at the state level.
No,
you have
right.
to push back
Absolutely.
on the local people. And so the question is not that we're 7th, is what makes us 7th, and what can we do about
Well,
it?
listen, look out this window. This is, you know, downtown Providence, commercial real estate rate in Providence is the 5th highest in the country. It was the 2nd highest, so I guess we're making progress because we've had a moratorium for a couple of years. But 5th highest, I mean 5th highest.
Yeah, no, when I was working for the city council, we developed some of that, data. And, what happened was this, and this goes back to the Paolino administration. Because of changes in valuation, the Paolino administration did not want to do it fairly, and they didn't want to take the political hit of having a hit on residential property, which at that time was escalating.
Yeah.
So they developed this classification system, and it just kind of compounded itself. And now we look around and see what's happened.
So let's talk about our situation. We've got a deficit. We're not the only state in the country, but there's about 10 states that have some ongoing budgeting issues. We've a deficit this year. We're looking at a more significant deficit next year, and we're in a very, very good economy by all normal indicators. Low unemployment, job growth, obviously a little bit inconsistent now stock market. Personal income is starting to creep up a little bit for the first time. What happens if we have an economic downturn?
Well, before you say that the economy is doing that well, it's doing poorly or well relative to something else. And so there are a couple of factors.
Okay, but we just came out of a 10-year rebuild out of a Great Recession.
There are 4 factors that we've looked at.
Sure.
We've looked at growth in the civilian labor force. We've looked at growth in employment, resident payroll employment here. We've looked at changes in labor participation rate, and we looked at changes in unemployment. And on every one of those factors, except changes in the unemployment rate, we trail our neighbors.
Yeah.
So you talk about economic growth, and I look at what's happening in Massachusetts, but forget Massachusetts, I look at what's happening as U.S. average, and even with our growth, we're not performing at the standard of the rest of the country in terms of those 4 factors. So we're doing better because a rising tide lifts all boats.
But I'm saying a slightly different thing. Listen, we're doing a lot better than we were comparatively in many of these things.
Sure.
But regardless, the likelihood it's going to get dramatically better is minimal. The likelihood that we could see a downturn, it's been a 10-year recovery.
What the recovery is, the numbers are not as great as they're pretended to be. Look at the number of jobs that we've created, and then ask the question: what compensation are these jobs paying? What are the wages and salaries? And I forget the number, but over a third, I believe, probably more than that, pay less than $45,000 a year. And so, what we have is an economic policy driven by corporate welfare, where the wealthy are doing very well. In this state, the lower income people, we have a strong safety net, And it's the middle jobs and the middle skills that he's trying to create that we're
Well, and you
structuring.
can't create those without better schools.
Amen. So now the dog just caught his tail, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we don't have that good an economy. We need more. We need better fix
We have
on.
an okay economy. But not-
You're giving it a B what?
I'm not giving it a grade. I'm saying relative to where it was 10 years ago, it's a B minus relative to what's happening in the rest of the country. It's a gentleman's C.
Gentleman's C.
Gentleman's C.
You heard it here first. Rhode Island economy is a gentleman's C in
Compare-
comparison to the rest of the country. One last issue, and this is old school week on Business Monday. It's Gary Sasse and Saul Kaplan.
Old
We
people.
are back to basics, okay?
Back to old people.
We are back to basics. This is where we want to be. Deming Sherman was on last week and kind of rolled out, and Saul and I are going to talk about this as well, but kind of rolled out some good news, bad news, and I don't know news relative to UHIP, a project that now has exceeded $500 million in total investment. And he said in the area in which he has been appointed by the federal court as special master.
Is that food stamps?
That is food stamps, the SNAP program. He believes that the technology fix is now in place, that once workers at Department of Health and Human Services are properly trained, excuse me, they'll be able to roll this out on May 19th, and it will. He's optimistic that that will take place. On some of the other aspects of it, he doesn't know, and was the first to say, "I'm not sure what the future of UHIP is." And then one other interesting thing he pointed out, and we'll talk to Mr. Innovation on this in a moment, and then we went and got it because it seemed absolutely perplexing that it could ever exist in 2018, which is that the application for, people in distress, poor folks, generally lesser educated, have to fill out a 40-page paper document.
So I will say this tongue-in-cheek, but it'll turn out to be true. If I had a multi-million-dollar corporation and I went over to the Commerce, Rhode Island, and I filled out an application to get tax incentives, it would not be as much as people filling out one for food stamps.
Oh, God, no. No, it wouldn't.
Something strikes you? Does
Yeah.
something strike you
No.
about that?
I mean,
So you
by
get
the
it-
way, you get 5, 6, 7 questions in. I went through it. You have no idea what they are asking you. The language doesn't make any sense. Filling out a mortgage for a jumbo mortgage is easier than filling out the application for food stamps.
And there's no excuse for that. The government exists to serve and to make it easier for people, particularly people in need. And the fact that this happens really means the bureaucracy was out of control. Bureaucracies get out of control when there's a lack of leadership. Period.
With that upbeat message,
You were asking upbeat questions. I was trying to be upbeat today.
Gentlemen, see.
Gentlemen, say it was
I want to thank Gary Sasse, always very helpful, very insightful, and appreciate him on Business Monday every week. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back with Saul Kaplan, Mr. Innovation, and we'll be right back.